Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on our first of two curriculum forums this week. This evening's curriculum forum is geared towards grades K through 5, and Thursdays will be geared towards 6 through 12. My name is Mike Bureau, I'm the superintendent, and I can't thank you enough for being here on an 85-degree day. Tomorrow's going to be 100 degrees with the heat index, so I'm glad we didn't schedule anything for Wednesday. I'd also like to thank our Board of Education for being here this evening. Thank you, Board of Education. Thank you to our administrators who are all here, our building level administrators, central office team administrators, and several of our staff are here. I'm not sure why we're divided this way, but it's just the way things fell out, I think. I want to send a special thank you to our parents that are here tonight, grandparents and community members. I know summertime is precious, and for you to take a time out of your week to be here means it's important to you. So we want to make sure that we make this meaningful for everyone. We are starting right at 6:30. Our plan is to end right at 7:30. To be respectful of everyone's time. I want to share with all of you part of our vision statement that's on our website. It says, our students will have the skills and competence necessary to understand and thrive in a diverse global society. During and after their time with us, they will be independent, healthy, resilient, and compassionate contributors to our community and beyond. Vision statement is what you aspire to be, or you aspire to get to. That's one of the places we aspire to get to. That's what we want for our students. We want our students to be able to live in a global society and to be contributors and to be happy, healthy, and resilient. Part of our Inclusivity Advisory Committee success statement says the following: diversity and inclusion is a source of pride for all PCSD members, enabling each individual to reach their fullest potential and positively influence the world. So as I look at, and this was done independently from the district, our vision statement and the IAC success statement, the similarities are that we're trying to help our students be really good people. That's the bottom line. We want them to be really good, thoughtful, empathetic, smart, critical thinking people that are going to go out and make the world a better place. That's our end in mind for both of those committees. My expectation, along with the Board of Education's expectation, is that all of our students receive a high level of affirmation on who they are, and that all students feel valued, appreciated, respected, and never have to feel like they have to check their cultures or their values at the door to become someone else in order to fit in our schools. We've been talking about inclusivity since 2018, which means we want people to feel that sense of affirmation and sense of belonging. That's where we want to start. We want to create a culture where our kids, all of your parents, your grandkids, your students, no matter who they are, can step onto a school bus or open the door on the first day of school after 2 years of being away, or opening up their classroom door for the first time and feeling really good about being in Pittsburgh. Feeling like they don't have to check themselves at the door, that they can be who they want to be. Curriculum is a part of the way to reinforce these foundational statements and beliefs. So tonight, our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Melanie Ward, will walk you through some of our changes to our curriculum that are aligned with the standards from the New York State Department of Education, along with our beliefs that we need to do more and do better at creating a fully inclusive environment for our kids and their families. Melanie's presentation will last 45 minutes, or maybe 40, if uninterrupted, leaving 15 minutes to answer questions. I ask that if you have a question, please write your question on the note card We'll have the staff collect the questions, and they will be answered at the end. And any questions that aren't answered, we will personally reach out to you and answer the questions. We also ask that your questions are focused on the topic at hand, which is around curriculum relative to what I just shared in your opening. With that, I thank you all for being here. I thank you, our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Melanie Ward, and all that had their hands in this work. Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mike Pirro. Thank you. And I too, before I launch in, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's summer, school hasn't even started yet, and you're here, which means you really care about what we're doing and what your kids are learning or going to be learning in school. So thank you for taking some time to be here. Thanks to the board, thanks to all the administrators, thanks to Erin Saccone and Teresa Rotes, who are two of our finest elementary standards leaders, and much of what I'm going to share with you tonight, they have had a hand in helping us to put together. And Dwayne, thank you also for being here. Thank you, everybody. Okay. So with that, and I'm going to be watching the clock a little bit because of those of you who know me know there is nothing I like to talk about better than curriculum. So I'm really going to try to move myself through this presentation and not get mired down in lots of details, so we do have some time at the end to respond to questions. So our goals for tonight are to share with you some information about ELA and social studies at the elementary level in Pittsford. I'm not going to share with you everything we do relative to ELA and social studies. I'm going to focus the conversation tonight on some specific aspects and some, most importantly, some updates that we've been making over the last couple of years. I want to demonstrate to you how our work in these areas is aligned with the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework, and that is a big mouthful, but it's a really important document, and I'm going to unpack that for you just a little bit tonight. And really, our overall goal is to promote a sense of transparency and cooperation and communication with our parent community when it comes to our curriculum in this area. So again, thanks for being here to help us achieve that goal. So I want to start with some definitions, because I think sometimes for folks who are not mired in this work, we throw terms around and it can be a little bit confusing, but it's really important for our purposes that we understand what some of these terms mean and what they don't mean. So to start with, standards. Standards are high-level benchmarks that are given to us by the state that tell us in very broad strokes what it is that we are responsible for students learning, no matter what school in New York State a child attends, right? So those are very high level. In some cases, there are state-level assessments that are aligned to those standards, and that's one way that we measure whether we have achieved the goal of meeting standards. In other cases, there are standards for which there's no external assessment, but we are still responsible for helping students achieve those standards. So those are good documents given to us by the state. Curriculum are documents that we develop locally. And in Pittsford, we take great pride in the fact that our curriculum is in fact developed locally. We don't purchase curriculum from an outside vendor and hand it to our teachers and say, here, go do this. We develop using the expertise of our teachers that are working in the classroom every day with students. We develop our own curriculum so that it is not only aligned with the standards set by the state, but it reflects the values and beliefs of our community. Curriculum is different from lesson plans or unit plans, right? So that's another distinction that I just want to throw out here for a minute. So an individual teacher or a team of teachers who all teach the same grade level or maybe teach the same course at the secondary level, they can work together to go from our curriculum documents to develop their unit plans and lesson plans that are really those day-to-day decisions about how they're going to do the teaching in their classroom. And those unit plans and lesson plans are obviously aligned with the curriculum, but they really reflect the needs of the students in front of them in any given year. So the next term is this culturally responsive curriculum. And I want to take just a minute to explain this, because this isn't a separate curriculum. So we're going to talk tonight about culturally responsive curriculum. It's not a separate document. It's not a separate curriculum. It's not a separate set of things we are supposed to teach. It is a lens through which we are looking at the development of our curriculum in all areas. It is a lens that asks us to think about how do we develop curriculum so that every child feels honored in the classroom, can connect to the learning, has an opportunity to learn more about themselves as well as their peers. So it is one of many lenses that we are responsible for applying when we're developing curriculum in any subject area. So it's not its own separate curriculum. Couple more terms. Culturally responsive sustaining education. This is the framework developed by New York State. They developed it in 2018, rolled it out with the expectation that districts begin teaching towards it in 2019. It's research-based. It really outlines the approach that we should be taking, again, to make sure that all of our students feel that they have a home here in their classrooms. That is not the same as the term that keeps showing up in the media, which is critical race theory. Critical race theory is a university-level, law school-level theory that's about systems and structures at a very, very high level. We do not teach critical race theory in the Pittsford School District. We're not a law school, so we don't teach that theory, right? So that's not the same. I think that part of the reason there's been some confusion in the community, not just our community, but community at large, is because as districts began down this road of culturally responsive practices, many districts started to adopt the term culturally responsive teaching, and then they shortened that to CRT, which unfortunately is the same thing that critical race theory gets shortened to. So those things get a little bit blurred in people's minds sometimes. So let's unpack the culturally responsive sustaining education framework for just a minute. These are some of the elements that are in the framework. You can see them up here. Again, it was released by the state in 2018 with the expectation that districts begin to implement the practices aligned with the framework starting in 2019. The rollout and awareness of the framework was a little bit stalled by the onset of the pandemic. But I can tell you that in Pittsford, we have been implementing practices that are aligned with this framework since well before 2018. So while it's been very helpful for us to have this document from the state, it didn't tell us a lot of things that we didn't already know or we weren't already applying to a lot of our practices, but it did put them together in a really important and cohesive way for us. I think what's really important to understand about this framework is that it is a document that talks about our obligation to have all learners see themselves in the classroom. This isn't about one set of learners. This isn't about one particular color of skin or race or ethnicity or religion or gender identity or anything. This is about all kids. So this is about every single one of our students having a place in our buildings, in our school culture, in our curriculum, et cetera. So it's a best practice framework for all students. There are four major principles in the framework: welcoming and affirming environments, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, and ongoing professional learning. So those are kind of the four buckets around which the framework is built. Tonight, we're going to focus on the inclusive curriculum and assessment. These four components work together to support one another and support the overall school environment, but they do have to be teased out separately in some ways. So tonight, we're just going to focus on that third one, inclusive curriculum and assessment. And I might look forward to opportunities to share in another setting some of the work we're doing relative to the other three components of the framework. So what are some qualities of a culturally responsive and sustaining curriculum? I'm going to flash them up here for you, but I'm not sure you can read them all. Develops critical awareness and critical thinking skills. So that's pretty important no matter what subject area we're talking about. Provides tools to differentiate and scaffold learning as appropriate. So that's a curriculum that builds right into it. Resources to help teachers make decisions about how to help all students access the curriculum and demonstrate success with the curriculum, regardless of where they enter it from. It's anchored in compelling, essential questions. So big questions that draw kids into the learning. That's part of a culturally responsive and sustaining curriculum. because we want kids to feel connected. We want them to be engaged. We want them to be excited about the learning. It's aligned to grade level standards and expectations, as all curriculum needs to be. It reflects relevant, authentic, and lived experiences. So what's in this curriculum for me? How do I see myself there? How do I see my community in the curriculum? Are there examples of problem solving that I'm doing that reflect my community, et cetera? A culturally responsive, sustaining curriculum includes opportunity for student voice and choice. That's a really important part here. We give kids, we build right into the curriculum places where kids are asked to make some choice about their learning, or asked to make some choice about the resources that they tap into to extend their learning. We take student voice into consideration when we craft the learning experiences. And finally, it embeds high-quality resources that reflect diverse cultures, voices, and perspectives, providing windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Now, I'm going to tell you that definitely those first 5 bullets up there have framed our thinking about high-quality curriculum for the last 11 years, at least. So those are not new criteria. When we in Pittsford think about high-quality curriculum, we would have used those first 5 bullets to define high-quality curriculum 10 years ago. What the framework has helped us do is put additional emphasis on those last 2 bullets, including more opportunities for student voice and choice, and embedding resources that are more diverse, that bring more perspectives to the table. So when we think about those qualities and then we start to apply them specifically to certain content areas, when we look at our ELA curriculum, these statements here all come from the New York State Next Generation ELA Standards documents. It's not everything that's in those documents, but it's some pretty high-level components. And if you look at these descriptors of high-quality English language arts curriculum, they match up really nicely with culturally responsive curriculum. There's not anything really newsworthy there, right? The same could be said if you looked at the qualities specific to social studies curriculum. Okay? So as we're working on our English language arts curriculum and our social studies curriculum and making revisions, which we are always doing. Curriculum in Pittsford is very much always a living document. We're always updating, making revisions. As we're doing it, we are making sure that our curriculum reflects these criteria that are pulled not only from the state content area standards, but also from the culturally responsive framework. Okay, so now I'm going to take you into some specific examples of work happening at the elementary level that's aligned with this thinking. So elementary ELA, that's reading, writing, and all things associated with it. For years, we have had a set number of required reading units at every grade level. So there are 3 or 4 required units that every first grader experiences as part of their journey through first grade in Pittsburgh. Doesn't matter what building they go to, they all have these reading units. And K through 5, we have that in place, and that's been in place for 9 years, I think, Erin, right? So some examples, however, as I was thinking about the work we're doing, of how we have actually been embedding culturally responsive practices into the curriculum for so many years, these units really take kids into folktales from around the world. And these are not new. As I said, all of these units up here have been in place for 9 years or more. So Trickster Tales in grade 1. Kids read a variety of trickster tales. They're typically folk tales from around the world. They have animals that trick each other, and they're fun. The trickster tales that we share with our kids in first grade come from India, Indonesia, the Amazon rainforest, the African continent, the Pacific Northwest, and the Pacific Southwest. So a very diverse collection of trickster tales that our kids have been reading, enjoying, and loving for 9 years. Same with the Little Red Hen unit in grade 2, where kids look at the Little Red Hen stories, both the traditional one that we might be familiar with, as well as variations that come from around the world. And Cinderella variations is the same kind of thing. So what are these units about? These units are really about helping kids not only understand what folktales and fairy tales are and the story elements involved in them, but it takes kids through the experience of analyzing the different texts and comparing them to really begin to think about all of the different story elements and how they play out in these various texts. And they're anchored around this question: how can reading different versions of the same story teach us about the world? So in place for many, many years, kids love these units. They're really a backbone of our primary reading instruction. Additional units that, again, have been in place for years and years that I think kind of line up with this greater effort around cultural responsiveness. The immigration reading unit in 4th grade. So again, this is a reading unit titled Immigration. It's tightly aligned with the New York State Social Studies immigration unit in 4th grade. 4th grade social studies, as you'll see in a minute, is about New York State history. So the immigration reading unit is really mostly centered on that experience of immigrants coming through Ellis Island, but it has been enhanced by layering in additional immigrant stories to give various perspectives, including, for example, the story of Chinese immigrants who came to this country to help build the railroads out west. So kids get an experience of comparing different immigrant experiences over time. Also at 4th grade, we have the mythology unit that has not only the ancient Greek and Roman myths, but also myths from Native American culture, China, and Africa as well. So recent work, updates that we've been making, include this project at 3rd grade around diverse characters. So we have a reading unit in 3rd grade that is titled Read to Retell. And any of you who've had 3rd graders go through our system might be familiar with this unit. It's anchored in the text Ramona and Beezus. I think that's the right one from the series, right? And the kind of the goal of the unit is to give kids an opportunity to learn some of those really important literary elements, character, plot, setting, etc., and to be able to summarize and retell a story. So those are the skills that they're practicing as they go through this story. One of the goals of the unit itself is to actually entice kids into reading book series. So 8-year-olds love to get their hands on a series that they can't let go of. And suddenly you have to go to the library and get the next, right? So part of this unit is designed to entice kids into that series. We realized, the 3rd grade teachers realized, in thinking this through very recently, that all of the book series that were introduced to kids after they went through the Ramona and Beezus story were book series that featured white children living in suburbia. There's nothing wrong with those books. They're great books. Kids love those stories. We're not taking those books away, but they're not enough, right? Because if we want kids to be enticed into reading, we need to give them an opportunity to dive into a series that more closely reflects their lived experience. So the 3rd grade teachers have been working with Erin to identify additional book series that can be added to the unit so that when kids partner up and dive into some independent reading, now they're able to find a book with characters that look more like they might look, that live in experiences that are more like their own lived experience, so they see themselves better reflected in the books that we're putting in front of them. So that's an example of some really, really hard and really important work that we're doing. And it's important to recognize, again, as I said earlier, we're not taking those other books away. We're just adding. We're providing more additional opportunities. And we're not saying to kids, gosh, if you're a black student, you need to look at this series, Dog Days, right? Because see, this child, he looks like you have to read that book. He can read any book he wants, but now he has the opportunity to select a book series that has a character that more closely resembles him, right? So we're not forcing anybody into anything, we're broadening our choices so that more kids are represented. Similar work is happening at 5th grade, where there is a reading unit that used to be called On Their Own, and we're shifted the language, and it's called Overcomers. So it really centers around stories about young people who have overcome some kind of adversity, physical, social, emotional, survivor tales, that kind of thing. So what kids go through, what people go through to overcome some kind of adversity. And this was another unit that the teachers recognized could really benefit from a broader selection of texts for students to select from for their independent reading choices. So there are a number of titles under consideration, a number of titles that are being added here. A Long Walk to Water is one that will be added as a read aloud. That's a book that, if you're familiar with that story, that takes place in Sudan, but it has Rochester connection. So that's the Lost Boy water story, which many of you may be familiar with. And then the other one that's going to be added as a read aloud is Amal Unbound, which is a story that is set in Pakistan and focuses on a young girl seeking justice and education. Book choices for independent book club reading will now include a book with a character who just wants to be the best at something. He explores literally every aspect of his identity. He goes out for the football team, he tries out for plays, he tries out all kinds of things because he just wants to be best at something. So he spends most of the book searching for his place in the world, trying to figure out who he really is. Another character in another book grapples with her family's changing financial situation, changing friendships, and facial hair dilemma. And a third choice introduces students to a girl who has no arms, but manages to still put her own hair in a ponytail. So we're really trying to broaden the selection and give lots of different perspectives for our kids as they explore books in our rooms. The process for text selection. So books aren't just picked willy-nilly for any purpose, and certainly for this work. So teams of grade level teachers have come together working with the standards leader. And again, they've identified gaps in the program. They nominate books to be considered to be added to the collection. Each book that's nominated is read by multiple teachers, and every teacher reading the book has used a text selection tool from Learning for Justice. And they're asked to rate every book on the basis of complexity, diversity, representation, and reader and task consideration. There's a series of, like a rubric that they're using for all of these books. They come back together, they have conversation about which books, how each book kind of rates against that tool, and the degree to which each book meets the goals of the reading unit, right? So again, this is all anchored in ELA standards. They have to be really purposely there to meet the goal of the unit. And then once those books are selected, book guides are being developed for teacher use in teaching to those books. So some of the books will take teachers into experiences with kids that they might not have taught around before, So there'll be guides developed to help teachers know how to answer questions and respond to kids as they explore some of these new resources. There are lots of things that happen throughout the school day at the elementary level that support our English language arts curriculum that aren't necessarily part of the English language arts curriculum. So certainly our elementary librarians and the libraries themselves are a huge resource to all of our programs. And I know we've talked in the district many times about the book audit that was done by our librarians, which continues to inform their practice of building up their collection. As they build their collection, they push amazing, beautiful, diverse books out into the classrooms on a daily basis. Teacher read-alouds are part of supporting the ELA program, and teachers are selecting from, again, more diverse, broader text, hanging on to some of the classics that some of us grew up and loved. So again, we're not discarding everything. This isn't about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. This is about building a bigger tub, if you will. Classroom libraries, principal book selection programs that happen in the various buildings. So there's I hesitate to say this because of everybody who's in the audience, there's almost nothing more important at the elementary level during the elementary day than immersing kids in books and doing the ELA work. That's a primary focus of, am I okay with that, Dwayne? Dwayne's a math teacher, so okay. So this becomes central to everything that we're doing. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the updates to social studies at the elementary level. Again, this is straight from our state documents, so these are the focus areas for each grade level in social studies. These have been the focus areas for elementary social studies 2 decades at least, right? 1996, okay, long time. So this is not new information, but this is just basically kind of the big topics that each grade level covers in the elementary social studies world. So we have some really exciting work underway here, though. We recognize that social studies is a really important place to very deliberately, just like ELA, to very deliberately think about our curriculum through this lens of a culturally responsive, sustaining framework. We recognize that our social studies curriculum is a really important place to provide students with explicit instruction around diversity, equity, social justice, and civic mindedness. And so we have embarked on a project that I keep sort of visualizing in my head as like a whole series of spiral boundings on the back of a book. So we're looking to develop strands that will start in kindergarten and go all the way up through 5th grade, and quite honestly will then continue up through the secondary level, that all circle around these concepts of diversity, equity, social justice, and civic mindedness. And so we launched this project this summer. We had 30 teachers together for 3 days in July. We not only wrote curriculum, we provided a lot of professional learning to the teachers that were involved in that. We took them through some experiences related to this work. And I think we have the foundation and a launching pad for some really, really great stuff happening. So we started the work by leaning heavily on high quality resources that our elementary teachers were already very familiar with when it comes to teaching social studies. So again, for years, Teresa Rhodes, our elementary social studies standards leader, has pointed teachers to these 2 primary resources as where they can go to get material that we can count on and trust relative to the social studies standards. So one is the New York State Social Studies Resource Toolkit Inquiries. Again, it's a big mouthful, but it's a series of inquiry experiences for every grade level, actually K-12, that were developed by teachers in New York State 6 years ago. Teresa was actually one of the writers for the state for that project. It's all inquiry-based work, really good stuff. And the second one is this Integrated Social Studies ELA project that the Putnam Westchester BOCES puts out and we subscribe to. And it's, again, really good stuff. They keep it updated. So those are resources that our teachers are all really familiar with, because elementary teachers have a lot on their plate. So it's important sometimes to start with what you know and build from there. We took teachers through a process of unpacking some of those resources and then reconfiguring them. Putting them back together, only putting them back together with some additions. So we put them back together by layering in explicitly ELA standards, because it's really hard to teach social studies at the elementary level without also having opportunities to teach ELA. And we layered in the social justice standards, which I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute. And we updated a lot of resources, built in some teaching protocols, et cetera. So we started with something we already had, and we unpacked it, and we put it back together better. We think better. So our desired outcome of all of this work eventually will be to have these common aligned units, K-5, that all spiral around these concepts that will be taught consistently across all 5 elementary buildings. It won't be the everything of social studies, but it'll be a really important part of the social studies work going forward. So I mentioned the social justice standards. I want to pull back and just share those with you a little bit for a minute. These were developed in 2016 by the organization that was formerly known as Teaching for Tolerance. They changed their name last year. They're now Learning for Justice. These are not New York State standards, so I'm going to be really transparent about that. Unlike everything else we've talked about, these are not New York State standards, but they are really high quality. They are broken up into 4 strands: identity, diversity, justice, and action. There's a total of 20 anchor standards, 5 in each of those areas. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples, because then what the document does is it takes these high-level anchor standards and it breaks them down into developmentally appropriate kind of I can statements that cut across some grade level bands. So a couple examples. In the identity strand, one of the standards, the anchor standard, so this would be like culmination level, right? Students will express pride, confidence, and a healthy self-esteem without denying the value and dignity of other people. So you say, holy smokes, what does that look like in kindergarten? Well, in kindergarten, it looks like kids being able to say, I can feel good about myself without being mean or making other people feel bad. And boy, that's a really hard thing to argue with, right? Don't we want all of our kids to be able to say that? 6th through 8th graders should be able to say, I feel good about my many identities and know that they don't make me better than people with other identities, right? Another example, in the diversity strand, students will respond to diversity by building empathy, respect, understanding, and connection. And I think a lot about what Superintendent Pirro showed and shared at the beginning tonight with our vision statement and our IAC success statement. I think that language is all over here. 3rd through 5th graders would be able to feel connected to other people and know how to talk, work, and play with others, even when we are different or when we disagree. And that's a goal that we work on every day at recess at the elementary levels. 9th through 12th graders would be able to relate to and build connections with other people by showing them empathy, respect, and understanding, regardless of our similarities or differences. The justice standard, students will analyze the harmful impact of bias and injustice on the world, historically and today, and you can see what that looks like at different grade levels. And one of the action standards, students will express empathy when people are excluded or mistreated because of their identities and concern when they themselves experience bias. And again, as I was reading back through these tonight, preparing to come over, I just kept thinking about Pittsford's mission statement, that we want kids to be their best, do their best, and make a difference in the lives of others. And I feel like that is exactly what these social justice standards help us to do, or are very, very tightly aligned with. So this summer, we did actually, on this social studies project, we created one new or revised inquiry unit per grade level. So again, we started with something we already had, unpacked it, put it back together. We did one of those for each grade level, K through 5. Every one of those units is aligned to New York State social studies standards, ELA standards, and the social justice standards. So in the inquiry document, those standards are called right out, right at the top of the document, so people know this work is anchored in these standards, and then what follows are their compelling questions. Updated resources were identified for every unit, so most of these units, there already were resources in them, but again, the units were 6 years old. There's been a lot of great stuff that's come out in the past 6 years. So our teachers spent a lot of time over those 3 days culling through resources and adding additional high-quality resources to the units. Every unit is built around compelling questions as well as those high-quality resources. We want kids engaged in critical thinking, problem solving, and critical analysis of text. So the beauty of inquiry units, in my humble opinion, is that they are not about telling kids what to think. They're about asking kids to think about a really important question and then giving kids resources to read, watch, talk about, explore, so that the kids end up being able to answer that question for themselves. So if the 6 of us were all engaged in an inquiry and looking at a compelling question, at the end of it, even though we look at all the same resources, we might all answer that question in a slightly different way. And that's what we want, right? Our social studies curriculum should be about teaching kids not what to think, but how to think. So you have to do that by framing it around big questions and then giving kids quality resources to help them explore those questions. So the compelling questions for the units that were developed this summer are here. Kindergarten, is everyone unique? So the kids go through some experiences, kind of describing who they are, learning about their friends. This is work that kindergarten teachers have been doing in their classrooms since I was in kindergarten, and that was a really, really long time ago. Okay? It's really like, who are you? And what do you bring? And who are you? And how are we alike and how are we different? First grade, we go from the how is every person unique to now thinking about families. How can families be the same and different? Second grade, I love this one. Do we have to have rules? That's the compelling question for the second grade inquiry, which is really designed to launch the second grade year. This is an experience where kids, along with their teacher, think about what they value. What they value about how they're treated, how they treat the materials in the classroom, how other people treat them. And then together as a community, they establish their community norms for how they're going to treat each other in their classroom throughout the year. And what I really love about what our teachers added to this unit, this particular inquiry this year, is what do we do if somebody doesn't follow those norms? What do we do as a class if somebody hurts somebody else's feelings? So that's all a piece that's rolled into there as well. The third grade question is, how does our culture make us similar and different? The whole third grade social studies curriculum all revolves around world cultures. That's the third grade focus. So that question of how does our culture make us similar and different certainly resonates. Fourth grade, Teresa and I feel like we need to do a little wordsmithing on the question itself, but you sort of get the point. Although different groups of people did not have equal rights or freedoms, how did the people of New York work to bring about change prior to the Civil War? So this is an inquiry that really takes kids into the work of abolitionists and suffragists pre-Civil War and has them look at how individual people made a difference and what kinds of things they did to impact society and how those people who were fighting for the abolitionists and the suffragists worked together and how they worked apart to change the face of New York State and eventually the country. And then finally in fifth grade, the question is, how do diverse perspectives affect the way history is told? We have a tendency to tell history through one perspective historically, and this question asks kids to think about, what if we told the story of particular historical events through a different perspective? So this will focus on the unit that has kids looking at when explorers from Europe arrived in the New World, but it will center the story both from the traditional European perspective and also from the perspective of the native indigenous people who were already here when the European explorers arrived, and looking at how those different perspectives shape the way you'll tell the story of those events. So those units will all be piloted this year by each of the writers. So these are not going to be unfolding in every single K-5 classroom this year. So the responsibility of the 30 people who came to write this summer is to take the unit back to their classroom, pilot it in their classroom, which is what you do with curriculum development. We'll get feedback from those who piloted, feedback from them. We'll probably, for some of the grade levels, if not all, try to solicit some feedback from kids. We'll make revisions to those units. We'll provide training to all of our K-5 teachers once those units are ready so that they can then be rolled out consistently across all K-5 classrooms starting next year. We also then have plans to repeat the cycle next summer, where we'll add at least one additional inquiry unit around this same theme of diversity, equity, civic mindedness, and social justice for every grade level. So, what do we have to look forward to? A lot. We have continued work going on to identify and integrate high-quality resources across all curricular areas, but specifically ELA and social studies. We are looking forward to piloting those new inquiry units, and we are looking forward to the development of additional teacher resources to support our teachers in rolling out some of these new units, some of the new books in ELA, et cetera. So that is work that is well underway for this fall. Here are some resources. When this, I think the slide will be posted on the web. So when that happens, you'll be able to check out those resources as well. And look at that, 7:16 and a half. And we're ready for any questions. So I don't know if Nancy's collecting, okay. Nancy's collecting some questions, so if you'll just give us a second. So this first question has to do with how we will ensure that parents and students in the Pittsford school community are given the opportunity to provide feedback, share experiences, and ask questions related to the ongoing development of this curriculum. In particular, how are you making sure parents and students of color feel safe and welcome sharing their experience and feedback related to existing curriculum? Great, great questions. So I mentioned that we will have a feedback cycle built in for the social studies units, as well as the ELA piloting of those new texts. I would welcome, certainly one way we're hopefully getting feedback is by you being here tonight. That's a start of that feedback. I'll be working with the standards leaders on how we can reach out and collect additional feedback from community, parents of all walks of life to give us some feedback. I think one of the things that can be tricky is, do you know when these things are happening in your own child's classroom? So figuring out how to time the collection of some of that input from parents would be something that we're going to need to think about a little bit. But we can certainly make some online opportunities available for people to give us feedback. Certainly, you're also, if you have questions as stuff is unfolding in your child's classroom, I hope everybody knows that the first place to go is to your child's teacher. If you've got any questions or concerns about what kids are bringing home. But I'm hoping that this is kind of a bigger level question in terms of you want to continue to partner with us. We will welcome that. We'll put some systems in place to get that feedback. Getting feedback from teachers and kids is kind of a routine part of what we do. So we will use those systems to do that.
Melanie,
Yeah.
I would also add that we are hopeful that our search for an equity coordinator yields a
Yes, thank you.
high quality candidate that we're able to hire with the timeline of September, I believe, Sean, sometime in September, which will then allow us to have many more types of two-way dialogue in forums like this, with probably less presentation and more discussion.
Thanks. So the next question, and this I really value, this is such an important question. How have you or will you bring new and diverse voices to the table, both for curriculum and for policy, et cetera? And that's such an important piece, and it's something that I know we have a lot of work to do. Our typical systems in place relative to working through curriculum, looking at text selection, involve the expertise of our teachers. It's no secret that our teaching force is not as diverse as we would like it to be. So we have begun to think about who's not at the table when we're having those conversations. Using some of the established protocols for text selection, for example, is one helpful way that I think we've broadened our lens, but it's not the same. Again, I think that's a piece, and I don't want to sound like every answer I'm going to give you tonight is, well, when we have this equity coordinator here, well, that person will figure it out. But I honestly do think that's a piece that I'm really looking forward to working with that person on, because I'll be really honest about this. And I haven't really even talked to Mike about this, my personal tension around this question is, so we look around the table, who's not there? Who needs to be there? Is it fair to ask an individual person to step in and represent all the other people who happen to have that same characteristic or that same diverse identity that we're sort of going after, if you will? So, because I don't think that's fair either, right? Every individual person is an individual and has their own experiences and their own perspectives. So if we were to invite a black person to the table as we're looking at text and wanting to get their lens on, does this represent the black child's experience? Seems like a really big burden to put on one person, right? So I'm trying to figure that piece out, like how to be really better at it, but be better at it with integrity and not be tokenistic about it and not put an unfair burden on people. So this is my own, I'm not sure. I know we have to do it, and I'm trying to figure it out in a way that also honors how complex curriculum development is and how complex it is to identify texts for kids at different levels. And that's the job of educators, is to do that work. So how do we invite people in who don't necessarily have that same expertise, and what's the dynamic? So this is my long way of saying, I know this is something we need to work on and get better at, and I'm really not sure how to do it yet in a way that is right and fair and good. And that's why I'm really looking forward to having an equity coordinator here who can help us think through this. Because again, it's so important, but I think there's a lot of landmines that we want to be careful not to step in while we're doing that work too. So,
I'm going to add
yeah.
just a little bit to that. I think our district has work to do with regards to building trust with the community. And when I say that, I mean the community. I mean people that are on this side of things, people are on this side of things, people are in the middle of things. So what you'll see in September during our next board meeting is hopefully us being able to shift from draft goals to goals that we can share in a very transparent way across the board and across the district. Part of those goals will be not only community engagement, but will also be student engagement. And you heard Melanie talk a lot about in their student voice and choice. We need to do a better job across our buildings and as a district, bringing students in to understand what their experiences are like and how we can do better because of the stories that they share and how they can contribute. So your answer is correct, but I will also say it is going to be one of our district goals is going to be around student and community engagement.
Thank you. Can you explain the reasoning behind the decision to not work with outside partners on curriculum, especially when there are groups like Pathstone partnering with many surrounding schools? So I'm answering this purposely right now because I know this has been a bit of an ongoing question in the community. I started early on in my presentation by sharing with you that our approach to writing curriculum in Pittsford has always been one of, we rely on the expertise of our teachers in the classroom who know our kids, who know our community, who know their craft, who know their content and curriculum. So that's always been our process. There are very, very few exceptions to that in terms of an outside resource being used as the curriculum. And honestly, I can think of one, and that is Foundations at the K2 level, which is a very structured program around phonics and phonemic awareness. And that is the one place where we've said, this is the thing and everybody must do this. And we have some very specific reasons for doing that. I have seen the Pathstone work. I have attended workshops given by Shane. I've looked at the curriculum. It's good stuff. I'm not in any way being critical of that work. My feeling is that in Pittsford, if we were to take something that had been created by somebody else from the outside, particularly around a content area like this, and said to our teachers, here, I'm going to hand you this, you must do it, it would feel so not Pittsford. It would feel so inauthentic because we don't do that with anything else. And furthermore, and maybe more importantly, we would lose the opportunity to build capacity in our teachers to be able to think about all of their curriculum through the culturally responsive lens. If it's a thing you take from the outside and you implant it in one grade level and you say, that's it, we've done our job, and I'm not saying that that's what the other districts are doing, but that would be falling so far short of our responsibility. The work that Teresa and I did with the social studies teachers this summer, yes, they wrote curriculum, they developed these inquiries, but at least 30% of our time together, I don't know, did I just die? At least 30% of our time together was spent on building capacity around equity and inclusive practices. Taking the group that was there through some very structured professional learning experiences, protocols, helping them wrap their arms around ideas about identity and bias and diversity. Because by doing that, they applied that learning to the inquiry that they were there to create, but now they take that thinking and that experience and they begin to apply that lens to all of their interactions with their kids. So our decision not to adopt, not to take the Pathstone curriculum, the Pathstone work, was more about, I felt obligated to do more, to go deeper, to build real capacity within our teaching community, even though it took us a little longer to begin to get there. I think it's more sustainable in that way. Now, I think that's a question that reasonable people could disagree on as to whether we should have or we shouldn't, but that's the thinking that we applied here in Pittsburgh. Okay, let me see if I can get to one more question. There's so many good ones here. Really, really thoughtful questions. So in developing critical thinking skills, how much consideration is given to the risk of pre-framing based on the selection of resources provided to the students? Oh, that is a great question. So this actually came up a little bit when we were doing the social studies work this summer. There was one team that my perception sitting in on their work was that they wanted to direct kids in a certain way. And it took a lot of work to kind of open them up to that idea that, yeah, it's really important that kids see a broader perspective of this person or this event. But broader means broader. Broader doesn't mean instead of thinking about the person this way, as we have for decades and generations, we're now going to think about the person only this way. So it took a lot of massaging and conversation and digging in to find additional resources to put in front of the team, because that's a really important question, right? Like, we're not doing this work because we suddenly want all kids to think a certain way. We're doing this work because we want kids to learn how to think. So we have to put a variety of resources in front of them. We have to require them to be engaged in resources that give different perspectives, not just different from what I think or you think, but different, right? They need to be reading about, seeing things from multiple perspectives so they can form their own opinion and back it up with evidence. So I think that's it's a great question because it's definitely a roadblock that we have to keep in mind as we're doing this work always. And I think it's also why, and there's another question here I know that references, we're not taking away some of the old stuff, and how are we looking at that through the DEI lens? And I would say, yes, we are. Again, this isn't about we used to do this and now we're doing all of this. This is more about we used to do this and now we're doing this, right? Because this is more inclusive. This hits everybody. This was great for a lot of kids, but it left a whole bunch of other kids on the sidelines. So we're trying to do this. But we're trying to do it in a way that doesn't tell kids how to think. It teaches them to think. Okay, so if there are any more questions, feel free to leave them on your table. I promise we will go through them. Either I or Mike, kind of depending on the question, will promise to get back to you, maybe not tomorrow, but shortly. The video will be posted on our website. So if there are people who are not able to be here tonight, I hope that you will encourage them to watch it. The slides will be posted. And thank you. Do you want to say a few closing things? Thank you.
How about a round of applause for Melanie? I just want to close by saying we're so fortunate to be back in school. We're back in school 5 days a week. We are going to have to tolerate wearing masks for a while. but we're back 5 days a week, and we're back with transitioning students from a lot of different models of learning. So we have kids that are new to the district coming in. We have students that are coming off of a remote learning model. We have students that are coming from the hybrid model. And we have that whole challenge of what all of our students went through over the last year and a half. And same with staff, and same with families. So know that this work around inclusivity and the timing of it couldn't be better. The concept of inclusivity is celebrating and affirming all differences and bringing them together in a real positive way so people can be proud of their uniqueness. And that their uniqueness is a strength to our district. And we need to find, and that's what we're doing, a thoughtful, strategic way and sustaining way to make that happen so that our students and our families can be proud to be in Pittsburgh, be proud to be in our schools, and that everyone has a home. We are going to talk a lot about and give a lot of love the first couple weeks of school. After that, they're done. But the first couple weeks, we understand we're transitioning back. That's a big deal. This work is perfect to bring the students back as well. I think in the slides, I heard the word empathy many times. And if we can all learn to be empathetic, to listen to one another, the world's just going to be a better place, and we're going to start that work in September when our kids come back. I need to thank this whole section over here too. The people that did all of the work, a lot of the work, and our administrators and our Board of Education. This summer has not been a vacation. The last year and a half hasn't been a vacation for us either. But no one stopped. They kept this work going. So if we can give them a hand too, I'd appreciate it. And to the families, you're the best. Thanks for coming tonight, and I look forward to many more forums. Thanks, everyone.